Explain like I'm 5. Why does insulation exist if air is a very good insulator? This has bothered me ever since I first heard the phrase as a kid. If air is a good insulator, why do we fill things with insulating material? Walls with fiberglass, coats with cotton. I realize these things are very porous, so hold a lot of air. But by them being used at all, must mean air isn't that great on its own. Is it just a matter of air is only good and other stuff is just even better? Or is it just considered good by being a bad conductor? Because air is very fluid and tends to move around. Insulation in a wall holds the air in place so it can do its job better. Still, air is a good insulator. But air is a gas. It starts to move when there are temperature gradients, creating convection. That greatly reduces its insulative properties. This is why so many insulating products are foams or fibers. They create barriers for the air pockets inside them to prevent large convection currents. Well, they actually do use air as insulation for windows. The thing is, there are better gases than air. 78% of air is nitrogen. But they use mostly argon as the insulator on windows because argon is much denser than nitrogen, which is in the air. Additionally, argon actually blocks UV rays as well as noise. Argon was discovered by Sir William Ramsay in 1894. Note: krypton is even better than argon in all of the properties I have mentioned. It is more expensive and not as readily available as argon though. Air is only a good insulator when it stays still. When it moves around it carries heat along with itself and stops being a good insulator. So insulation materials are often designed in a way that creates lots of partially or completely isolated air volumes that prevent this air from moving around and thus let it show its insulation capabilities. Trapped air is a good insulator. Air that's moving around will also move the heat around, which is the opposite of insulation. Stationary air does not transfer temperature well. But a large volume of air is also quite mobile. And moving air changes how we perceive temperature. Think of how a breeze on a hot day cools you down. We fill walls' coats with things that trap the air so it's more stationary. Still, air is a good insulator. Moving air is a conductor of heat. The purpose of the insulation is to hold the air in place and prevent it from moving, which is why the insulation creates pockets of air. This is a great question. Stationary air is indeed an excellent insulator. Moving air, however, is a terrible insulator. It can be hard to keep air from moving. Note that the effective temperature in winter depends on wind. Because when the air moves you lose heat very quickly. The best insulators are teeny tiny pockets of air sandwiched between layers of lightweight, thin material. That air can't move much. The best insulator in an atmospheric environment is aerogel. The best flexible insulator isn't even synthetic, it's Arctic duck down. Air is a good insulator. But because it's fluid it can form convection currents which are good at moving heat. What the insulator does is to try to immobilize the air as much as possible to prevent the formation of these currents. Air is a good insulator as long as it doesn't move. An easy example are thermopanel windows. They are just two glasses with trapped air in between. Still, air is a very good insulator. Moving air is very good at transferring heat through convection. Insulation stops air from moving. Heat doesn't move through air very well. However, air with heat in it tends to move through other air rather rapidly because gas density decreases with temperature. That quote should be updated to stationary air is a very good insulator. Free air moves around too much. So insulation was created to hold it stationary so it can, insulate. Air is shit at conducting, but kicks ass at convecting. Insulation makes many little pockets of air to keep the lack of conducting and also stop the convection. Just to add on what everyone else says, insulation also helps to reduce noise and the spread of a fire. Insulation is just a material to hold air. It keeps it from moving around too much. And heat transfer also slows from medium to medium, so having many small pockets of air instead of one large one slows the transfer even further. Air isn't really that great. The highest-end home insulation you can get are vacuum-insulated panels, which is where they put a low-density foam inside of a bag and suck out all of the air. It's many times better than standard insulation. But its obvious Achilles heel is nails. Air is a great insulator. Water suspended in air is an amazing container and conductor of heat. Humidity is why air can transfer and hold heat. Air as insulation only works when it's sealed and moisture-free. That's very hard to do, so closed-cell foams and fiber matting outperforms. I am pretty sure the phrase air is a good insulator refers to air as an insulator in regards to electricity. Air is a good insulator because of how few particles exist, which means it's less likely for them to bounce and pass on heat. Whereas a solid is all joined together. So if one end heats up, it moves through the metal easily. But air is also fluid, which means it's constantly moving around, meaning it will pass on the heat or take it away frequently. If you have trapped air in between two solids, you have a very good insulator. Air that can't move is a very good insulator. The problem is without something to prevent it from moving, it isn't an insulator. Most of the insulators have very big holes inside of them where the air can safely not move. Air is only a good insulator when not moving or moving very little. When it moves, it takes heat away via convection, which is very good at equalizing temperature. That's why an air gap in double-glazed windows is quite small. Air is the insulator, sometimes an inert gas. When air can't move around, it's great at stopping heat loss through conduction. Because interfaces, where two different materials touch, further reduce the capability to transmit heat, thus making re-insulator more effective. All of the materials you mention and most others used to insulate buildings are essentially small pockets of air contained in another insulator. Air expands and contracts with temperature. This makes it less dense when warmer and vice versa. Hot air rises. I'm sure you have heard of that. This creates a convection current. If we trap air and limit its movement, then air will only transfer heat by conduction and some radiation. Everything will radiate heat. Because air moves around, especially when there's a temperature difference. You don't want air moving around if it's going to carry away all the heat you are trying to keep insulated. So insulation is often just some solid but very porous material that will hold a lot of air in it and keep it from drifting away. But it's still utilizing the air to help it insulated things.